Putting good deeds in headlines may not be so good by Tovia Smith, 2013. When Glenn James, a homeless man from Boston, found a backpack filled with $42,000 in cash and turned it in, the media immediately picked up the story. Before long, the story of his good deed had gone viral. But as Tovia Smith reports, James's story is just one of many examples of people making moral decisions. But is publicizing these good deeds making people better or worse? As you read, take notes about what tools the author uses to support her argument. An online collection has raised more than $145,000 for a man who stumbled into a pile of money and turned it over to the police. Glenn James's story of a good deed is just one of many making headlines. It may not be exactly brand new, but public interest does seem to be piqued these days by ordinary folks making what are seen as extraordinary ethical decisions. Some, however, question if airing this kind of good news is actually good. A series of good deeds. James's story, he is the homeless man in Boston who turned in a backpack filled with $42,000, went viral. So did another recent story about a Dairy Queen manager from Minnesota who stood up for a blind man who didn't know he'd been robbed. The blind man dropped a $20 bill, and a woman picked it up and pocketed it. The manager threw her out of the restaurant and then handed the man $20 from his own pocket. Just a few weeks before that, stories swirled about four college football players who found themselves inside a store that was accidentally left unlocked. Instead of just taking what they wanted, they left every penny they owed at the checkout. One television report called it a story of honesty that's become a shining beacon of righteousness. There are lots of people who suffer from moral myopia. And so when you see this good happening, it renews some of your faith, says University of Texas professor Mimi Drumright. She says these are the types of stories you hope will inspire copycats. The reports of these good deeds probably are going to beget more good deeds, and that is a good thing. Already, countless strangers have been paying it forward with $20 tips to the Dairy Queen worker, and everything from jobs to gift cards to other do-gooders, not to mention the small fortune for Glenn James. Moral grade inflation. But as the risk of twisting any of these precious good news stories into more bad news, experts say there may be a downside to overplaying it. They did do the right thing, and that's commendable. But heroic? I think not, says Carnegie Mellon ethics professor Peter Madsen. He sees high praise swirling around the stories as a kind of a moral grade inflation. They had an obligation to do what they did. It was not above and beyond the call of duty. They really just did what we should have expected them to do, he says. When you celebrate what should be ordinary behavior as extraordinary, experts say, it sends a dangerous message. I do worry about a culture in which people are giving themselves credit for not having done terrible things. It sets a really low bar for what it takes to be a good person, says London Business School professor Daniel Ephron. Ephron, who teaches behavioral ethics, says fetting folks for what he calls the immoral road not taken could actually encourage bad behavior. When guys with integrity get put on a pedestal, he says, the implication is that they're exceptional, far greater than the rest of us. It suggests that most people in the situation would have done those bad things. So, it reinforces a norm that most people are selfish and self-serving, and therefore it's okay if you're selfish and self-serving, Ephron says. The big surprise? Others, however, suggest the reason these stories are seen as remarkable is not because we diminish ourselves, but because of the way we diminish those particular do-gooders. In this particular case, I'll just say it. The homeless man was an African American guy, and most of the young football players who paid for their goods were African American. says Candace Upton, who teaches moral psychology at the University of Denver. I don't think it's beyond this culture at this time to say that we do have lower expectations, which is unfair. But that's what sets up the big surprise, and hence probably the big response. Giving Good Samaritans celebrity treatment may also have the unintended consequence of creating monster expectations, kind of like a kid expecting a prize every day that he's not late for school. You have to be careful not to go overboard, as one expert put it. But celebrating people for doing the right thing is still the right thing.